Hello, my name is Emily, and this is my final project for Forbidden Archaeology, a course offered at the University of South Carolina in fall 2016 by Professor Andy White. I will be discussing with you guys today my theories on the origins of the Georgia Guidestones. Now, I'm not going to go into much detail about the Guidestones themselves. If you are unfamiliar with them or you would just like to read up a little more, I would suggest that you do so. There is plenty of research out there available, as well as take a day trip and go visit the Georgia Guidestones and see what you think. I will include in the description below a link to an article that I read in Wired magazine that I thought did a very good job of summing up some of the possible historical significances, as well as just the general story of how the Guidestones came to be. It was a good article, so I suggest that you read it. This course that we took on Forbidden Archaeology was transformational for me in my thinking critically about some of the claims that are being made, specifically to the Georgia Guidestones. I myself have been interested in the Georgia Guidestones for well over 5, maybe 10 years now, ever since I first heard about them. A little background on me personally: I'm an anthropology major and a religious studies minor. I am interested in spiritual things, and the occult has always been something that has sort of fascinated me. So I was excited to be able to take on a project that I think has a very large scope, in that it is a mystery. I was not intending to be able to solve this mystery. However, I would like to synthesize some information that I have gathered and hopefully draw some conclusions based on the evidence to some of the claims at the Georgia Guidestones. Again, specifically their purpose and their origin. So what is this claim? The claim is that the Georgia Guidestones were built by the Rosicrucians. Now, without any research being done, or a minimal amount of research, maybe seeing what you want to see, some folks have used this critique as a way to further ideas of an Illuminati, New World Order, conspiracy theory. And I have to say, I myself was one of those people until I did a little more research and learned how to think critically. So let's not blanket New World Order, Illuminati, conspiracy theory on this subject. Let's put those notions aside. What I would like to do is look at the origin of this idea that the Rosicrucians are the ones behind the Georgia Guidestones. So whenever this gentleman came to Elberton County in 1979 to have to potentially have this monument built, he went by a pseudonym, R.C. Christian. So it is very easy linguistically just to make the jump that R.C. Christian stands for Rosicrucian, and therefore he is a Rosicrucian. Well, I think that argument is pretty weak sauce. Not that it's not true, but you're going to have to give me a little more than that. My initial research, I could not find very much more than that. A fellow by the name of Mark Dice, you might be familiar with him, has a quote in reference to this idea that anyway, let me just read you the quote. Mark Dice claims that the Guidestones should be smashed into a million pieces. He claims that the monument has a deep satanic origin, and then goes on to talk more about the New World Order. So my question would be, are the Rosicrucians tied to a deep satanic cult? That's what Mark Dice seems to think. So let's go back to Rosicrucian himself. When he came to Elberton County, we'll put that off to the side for now. When he came to Elberton County, he did tell the folks at the granite industry that he was representative of a small group of loyal Americans. So we see here that Rosicrucian was not acting alone. He was indeed part of a group of people who sought to have this monument built. And these people considered themselves to be loyal Americans. So why did Christian say he wanted to have this monument built? Well, he told the folks that the monument itself would serve a functional purpose, that it would serve as a compass, a calendar, and a clock. Well, all three of those things are mathematical. They are measurements of sort. So he had, I guess, presumably, and his group of folks had an interest in math and in science. Also, that the monuments would be engraved in the 8 most used world languages. And I read an account that some of these languages had to be actually translated by the United Nations. I don't know about you, but I don't have any connections with the United Nations. So it might be a leap to say, I'm going to go ahead and say it, that somebody in here's got some ties with some higher powers. So there might be some political undertones here if they can get the United Nations to translate something for them. Not really sure on that. Either way, also that these stones would be guides to reestablish a better civilization than the one that was about to destroy itself. There are definitely apocalyptic overtones with this. So the idea is that the monument needs to be one that can be erected in a fashion that if the world were come to an end, the monuments would stay there and serve as a template for possibly the way that humanity would reconstruct civilization after this cataclysmic event. So what we have here, we have a gentleman who's not working alone. We have math and science heavily involved, apocalyptic undertones, and the possibility that this group is the Rosicrucians. I want to look at Mark Dice's analysis that the Rosicrucians are a satanic cult. That could not be farther from the truth. Look at the origin of the Rosicrucians. I did a good bit of research and reading into the history of the Rosicrucians, and they are a cult. There's no mistake in that. There's definitely hidden practices going on underlying this group. But it goes so much farther back in history than just the United States that it is very interesting, some of the connections that can be made between the Rosicrucians and going forward in time to Freemasons and even our founding fathers, but also backwards in time to ancient ideas perpetuated by folks like John Dee, and then even further with the Brethren of Purity, writings that were written to a secret knowledge that I don't personally think that us as modern Americans have the ability to hash out without the historical perspective. And that is the piece that we leave out whenever we blanket something and couch something in the terms of Illuminati or New World Order, which I'll have to be honest, I did a lot of before I started analyzing these claims with that historical perspective. Long story short, I do think that the Rosicrucians, possibly and extended into Freemasonry, are the ones behind the monument in Elberton. When I was looking into the Rosicrucians and I came across the connection there with their occult practices, continuing a tradition of ancient Arabic practices that specifically linked magic with science, with religion. It's hard to get past those same connections in the Georgia Guidestones. They just line up hand in hand. There's definitely astronomical alignments there. They're clearly spelled out, as well as many of the ideas in this Rosicrucian community, as well as the works that they drew on from the Brethren of Purity and the works of John Dee, were heavily occult. They were magi. They studied the stars, and they also worshipped nature. And one of their central tenets is to become, for man to become God. That is intrinsically different than the current Christian theological perspective that God came down to become man. Brad Meltzer actually did an episode of his show, I believe Decoded, that touched on and glossed over, if I might say, this Rosicrucian connection, and sort of laughed it off as Rosicrucians, they are happy, spiritual Christians, and there's no way they would be connected to satanic rituals. Well, it's not a satanic ritual if you were engaged in the practice of magic to these people at this historical given time. The practice of magic is a way to speak to angels and to affect the physical world through your mind. I mean, these people use specifically scrying boards and crystal balls and practices of geomancy to discern the will of God. And this is so different than our current perspective on religion. We are so far removed from this that we see these things as satanic when they are not satanic. Just to make the point that the roots of these ideas go so far back in our history, as a nation, that even folks like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and Francis Bacon, other members of the Royal Society, are influenced by these concepts. And this is American history in a way that we have never been taught. There is evidence that John Dee played a major role in the foundations of the Enlightenment. And that led to this Rosicrucian movement. Is this movement... okay, do ideas of this sort of like New Age, maybe even Kabbalah, sort of transcending oneself, are those ideas influenced by these Rosicrucian lines of thinking, modes of thinking? Possibly so, but I don't think that we can draw the Guidestones necessarily out to such an end. I feel like the Guidestones were erected by a group of people who are representative of the Rosicrucians. Lastly, one thing that I found that really pinpoints this for me is in the physical layout of the monument itself. Aside from the astronomical alignments or the words written on the script written on the tablets, I read that one of the central tenets of the Rosicrucians is that there would be an expansion of these ideas, that there would be a central sort of hub of knowledge, gnosis, the Rosicrucian knowledge, and that from that knowledge would span 12 more groups that all focus on the knowledge already held by the Rosicrucians, but continue to perpetuate these thoughts into the world. Well, the Georgia Guidestones are built on a site that is intended to continue to grow in a way that holds the central monument as the focal point and adds on 12 more pieces of archaeological evidence that tie back directly to the one central piece there that's already there. They have specifically laid out in the plans for the Georgia Guidestones a physical representation of the exact same ideas that are presented in their own theology, if you could call it that. That is a direct connection that I think is irrefutable. So, in closing, I would challenge you to not use the terms Illuminati, conspiracy theory, New World Order as a way to blanket any historical or archaeological claim. Every claim has an origin, and seeking out that origin might not be easy, and it might be muddy, and you might have to make assumptions. However, seeking out the origin of any claim is going to give you more insight into what that evidence is saying. And I personally am not going to use those terms as a way to, and I would challenge you to not use those terms as a way to sort of like get around having to do the work. And also that in basis, these ideas are Christian in nature. Even though we don't view magic so intrinsically combined with science or religion or even politics, now these people did, and there are people who still carry on these traditions. So let's not be scared of those things. Let's look at them critically for what they are. And further the knowledge that is there at our disposal. So thank you. That's a challenge that you can have for looking critically at any claim. All right.